So with that, let's get started.
Yeah, let's go. So I actually want to start a little bit different than what you and I had discussed. So you have been working for the last 20 years, and this kind of goes back to the beginning of your career, not quite the regenerative edge. So you've been working in sustainabilities and systems change for the last 20 years. So I want to start with, what is it that you're seeing that's different in this space now?
Yeah, what's different? Well, I feel there are new possibilities and this sense of permission to do things differently now that I didn't sense or feel was there 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or even just before COVID. And for me personally, what am I seeing differently now? I had this in reflection, I'd say over 20 years before I started this business, and as I've started my own business of the regenerative edge, I had this amazing successful career, and when I look at it now, it was successful on paper, right? And I look back and I had this kind of painful irony in my own work, if you will. So I had developed this career in sustainability. I wanted to help contribute to systems change. And the way that I was working was so unsustainable, right? And I think that contradiction is, I can no longer ignore it. I see it everywhere, that I, as a leader who is advocating for systems change in climate work, in sustainability, in the way we as humans bring better systems and innovations to this world, we were basically bringing these creative things and these new ways of thinking and putting them into an old box of management, organization, style, right, and culture. And they all often lead to burnout because we look at these very individual pieces of efficiency, control, permission-based decision-making, for example. And I look back at my career and I had all of that. No wonder I was burnt. No wonder I wanted change. And I wanted to evolve, and I kept looking, for ways that I could grow and change and be a better leader. But I didn't stop and think about, what does that mean? And what does it mean to be a better leader than what I'm currently doing? And I think we can't separate ourselves from the systems that we're trying to change, right? We can't improve them in ways that might be better for the future, for example, and these really innovative ideas, if we ourselves can't change the way that we are being, the culture that we're in. And we often ask individuals to make those changes and to change their performance, right? To be more efficient, to take on more with less. And when we're in this sustainability, climate, social change space, we might be asking the wrong questions, because if we're separating that interchange from the systems change, I think that is one of the fundamental issues, because they're completely interconnected. And that's been a really fun thing for me to explore, not just theoretically or, in principle, but to really implement in my own business, right? Okay, what does it mean for me as a leader in my business, in my role as an entrepreneur? What am I going to do differently? How am I going to set a different rhythm, for example, for myself? If I want to work with individuals or teams or organizations, I need to be embodying those things and shifting the way I lead. And that's been really amazing to see, because I get to work alongside people who are deeply committed to their work, really passionate about what they do. And we're addressing just complex problems it's overwhelming, right? It's exciting, and there's constant change in those areas. And we tend to reach for these older strategies of looking for expertise outside of our organization, or looking for the next right strategy or framework, or making our business more efficient. But it's really not sufficient to create the future that we want. And so I've been in this place of really deeply thinking what does systems change really need? What is change
Mm.
management really about? And how do we lead that to be more of not just sustainable, but a big part of my work is bringing in regenerative leadership. How do we leave the system better than what it was? How do we consider that interconnectedness um, of the whole system of the organization, knowing that we are very much a part of it, but we are one part of it, and how we show up um, makes a big difference. And
Mm.
I'll keep it there because I can talk about the things that I've learned as a leader, but I'd see that what I'm seeing differently is the importance of uh, understanding and that reflection and seeing not only what isn't working so we can create change, but it's more like what are the conditions that allow myself to change? What are the conditions that allow others to change or the organization to change? And that's been this kind of inquiry that I've been exploring a lot more of recently.
Thank you for that. There's a couple things that I think we can talk about there, in particular around like systems change, because really what I'm hearing is that there's only so much as an individual that you have impact over. And it's also when you're in it can be really challenging to see what you can do to impact change or like where your influence is, et cetera. And like when you're, especially if you kind of have like your blinders on, like your institutional blinders on. So, but before we go into that a little bit more, I want to lean into how a lot of what you've talked about here is what prompted the origin of the regenerative edge. And the name behind your business is really intentional. So I want to talk about, that origin story a little bit, however in depth you want to go, because I know there's a lot there that could be another session, but what you mean by the regenerative edge, why you named your business this, and what brought you to start this business.
Sure. So the meaning behind the regenerative edge was kind of my exploration for what does good leadership mean? What is a way of approaching systems change from a leadership perspective? And as I started to explore that, I had my own language, but I felt like I just kind of wasn't, I couldn't really articulate it in a way until I came across this concept of regenerative leadership. And I thought that's interesting. What does that really mean? And in essence, looking at the word regenerative not as a buzzword, right? Not as another, like a sustainability but regenerative really getting at the core of beginning with life and not thinking of ourselves as separate from life and nature and the humans and the people in the world that we're part of. And so what does that mean in our leadership? And it's thinking of our leadership as a living system, thinking of our organization as a living system. So as I started to think about that, I started to study it. This is a concept that Laura Storm and a few others have created, and I've just found it to be really interesting because in our old style of management, more mechanistic way of management that came up around the Industrial Revolution, it was how do we make things more efficient, right? As we're bringing workers to factories and businesses, and it worked then, but it's not working now. However, the influence of it has stayed with us, and so we've kind of established these walls of separation, our work life and our personal life, and our the way we organize our businesses, it's hierarchical. And so we start to have that permission-based thinking and decision-making, and we're extracting from each department rather than figuring out how we can be more regenerative, like leaving leaving life better than it was when we found it, for example, and thinking about whole systems thinking. So I say all that, and I can talk about it a lot more, but that is a concept that has just really spoken to me. And it's not this theory that speaks to me. It is a way of life, a way of living, a way of us not coming back to, but this remembrance of how we relate to each other and what it means to be a human. And so the regenerative edge really was rooted in some of that language, and the idea of edges really just being about our growth edges, our learning edges. If we are committed to growth and our own evolution and our goals, we are often coming up against these edges and these challenges in our work. And so the regenerative edge is my body of work. It's a space for me to kind of push my own boundaries and my ways of thinking. And it's a space that I'm saying is it's really a place to see things differently. For me, for just people who are interested in this, they don't have to be my clients, for example. But I'm finding that I want to articulate it more. I want to play with these ideas. I want to not just talk about them in this theoretical standpoint. What does it mean to implement them? What is awkward? What feels awkward when we do this? What's that human experience of participating, I'd say, in this way of leading, this way of being. And it's not easy, right? Trying new things is not easy, but that's where we really grow and change. So the regenerative edge it's my body of work. It's the name of my business. It's where people encounter my work. So people can find me like here on Substack, but also it's this jumping off place. Because I'm about to launch the regenerative lab, which is where people can come in and participate in these concepts and frameworks and new ways of thinking. So it's not just information. The regenerative edge is more information. It's a place to learn and grow, but a lab is a place to participate and practice. And so thinking about, I don't know, it's the space where we can consider who we want to become in a way. As I'm exploring this question, and just as it grows, it will grow not only because of me, it will grow because of my work with others and others participating in this edge, right? This idea of leaving a space, either it's ourselves or an experience better than when we started it.
I really, to go back to the regenerative part, this living systems, you said something to the effect of like, we don't need to come back to it, but I think we do need to come back to it. I think that's a really good point that you make, that we've kind of like lost ourselves in the high performance, like ultra productivity, always being tapped in. We can do things faster, we can do things better, which in some ways is really amazing, because then we have more opportunities, more resources, and we can really accomplish a lot. But then to kind of like back to your origin story of like, what I think you said something to the effect of the painful irony of you working in sustainability, but but the way that you were working was unsustainable. I think you're at this really interesting, I guess, like intersection, for lack of a better word, where it's like, we all know that culture, that hustle culture, isn't necessarily going away, but how do we take some of that back? The very first point that you made is that like we have permission to be different. And so like that's coming back around. Like we are kind of coming back around of like, actually, no, I don't want to be a part of this full hustle culture. So how do we find that, to use your word, that edge between the two? And I know there's a lot of applications to this concept within your body of work, but that edge of how do we come back to ourselves and like being our whole selves in work, and being able to grow and evolve and like find joy in that, rather than find that as like a chore or like something that's really like a grind every day. So I think what you're doing is like you're your goal in some ways is to bring that beauty and that joy back into the work that the people that you're working with are doing. And then, to expand out on that. And I think this is kind of a good segue into that next, kind of the next transition of it, or that next evolution rather, is like you've got the individual, but then how the individual impacts the organization, and then how the organization impacts the individual, and that symbiotic relationship of that, of these living systems, right? Because it is people that are creating these teams, and certainly we have technology to support that, but it really sounds like you're bringing it back to that like human component. Living systems is how you're doing that, or like the verbiage that you're using to do that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. You think about the efficiencies of things, and right, we could talk about AI, and we have these tools at our fingertip, but it's information only. Humans have to implement it. It can tell us what to do or how to do something. And we then have to bring our interpretation of that, to it. And we then decide, do I want to follow this, to a T? Do I want to take what feels interesting and leave the rest? And then what? And then what? This change, because I think ultimately all of my career I've been working in change management. It's just looked differently, and I've been maturing it, of course, over 20 years. And what a privilege I have right now to focus on this, to develop my thinking, and to not develop my thinking in isolation, but to do so working with leaders and organizations and teams and groups of people. And there is so much information. That is not the problem. And thinking about the climate space, I spoke at Pacific Northwest Climate Week of last month, and it was amazing. And technically, we have so many answers, so many solutions, so much innovation. What's holding us back from real change is how we're leading. It's how we relate to one another. It's how we relate to the systems that we're part of. And so it kind of goes back to that point I made earlier about working in sustainability and working so hard to bring a more sustainable future to life. But I burned out in the process, right? And so did so many of my peers. And there's a different way of doing things.
Yeah.
And often I think the hard part in all of this is we've been conditioned to think more in that mechanistic lifestyle, and to fit in to someone else's mold, or to fit into the role that we've been given permission to take on and to step into, for example. And so a lot of the work that I do is kind of starting to see what's underneath the surface of the tension of the problem that we identify. And often it is about the conditioning. It's the things that aren't being said. And then I create the conditions for that awareness. And then the awareness, we can't stop there. That's not where change happens. We all are aware, like you were just saying, we're aware of these things. But if we don't act differently, if we don't choose new action or choose a new way of doing things and then practice it, give ourselves a space to get it wrong. Give ourselves a space to be like, didn't go so well. What did I learn, and what am I going to do differently? And then do it again and iterate. And that's, I think, where having a guide, a coach, I call myself an advisor, because coaching is a skill I bring into my work. It's not the only thing I do. And I think that is where this kind of change management is needed. We need more space to participate differently, to practice new things. And that is, I think it gets at the core of a lot of my work. I don't just tell someone, here's my framework, go now do it, because it worked for this last organization. It's listening deeply. It's learning what their issues are, and starting to identify what that is. between the words that they're saying and underneath the surface of what they're not saying. And then we go from there, because it's often not the people, right? It's the culture, it's the systems that are in place, it's conditioning in that culture that's holding us back. And so it's that relational piece is huge. And if we know these things, a big part of my work is then helping them implement differently, helping them practice in a place where we know it is totally fine to get it wrong as long as we're learning. Yeah, so I'll leave it there because that's I should say a big point that I do want to make is I'm not coming in with the answers. I'm not the expert. You are, right? The individual, the team, the organization is the expert in what they do, and they know they want to do it differently. So then that's where we get really curious. And it often doesn't take too long for me to see kind of what might be underneath that surface. And so that gives us some really fun and kind of fruitful space to look at the system, right? Look at that living system and consider, okay, these are some things that we can practice to see what kind of shifts and changes come from that.
Yeah. So your approach then, just to kind of synthesize some of what you said, is to go into an organization and kind of understand. I mean, it's like any other ecosystem. You need to understand like the systems that are already in place, and as a third party, be able to identify where maybe things are breaking down or the systems aren't working for you. So do you have like a certain set of conditions where you feel like these living systems can most flourish? Like, is there like, do you have sort of like a template to apply, or what's your approach to support your organization's living systems to come out the other side better than where they started?
Yeah. I mean, I do have a general framework and process. I call it the regenerative edge method, but it's really starting with that reconnection space. So and I don't like to use the language of going back to something because we're never the same in a way. So it's that reconnection with our truth. What is the mission? What are our goals? You're like reconnecting with those again, because we get going and we just take off, right? And all of a sudden we don't realize how far we are from the goal, for example, the mission. So that reconnection phase is really important. And from there, it's really about realigning. Once we reconnect, we are remembering what's important. We're realigning systems. That's where we're starting. Okay, we need to shift this. We need to add this, remove this, say thank you so much. And it's time to move on, whatever that might look like. And then we work on what that regenerative piece looks like. How do we shift and start to really look at this as a living system now that we have reconnected with our goals, our mission, whatever that might be? We've realigned some things. We've composted some things, we've gotten rid of some things, and we've brought in new things, for example. And the regenerative piece is, how do we make this not sustainable? Because that's just how do we maintain this, but how do we make it better where it is? How do we really bring this to life? How are we interconnected as a team? How are we interconnected? And then other teams in this organization or other groups, for example, and we start to look at the whole system. And we might stay there depending on where they want to go. And the last phase that is really fun is that rising piece. It's in WRISD, where we're really now living into that and practicing it and seeing you can start measuring the things that are different, and really we could come up with our own KPIs and whatnot, or we use what you're currently measuring and we start to see how we can fit into that. And the process will look different for every client, depending on what it is they want, how open they are, how many people are involved, for example. But it's really incredible to see as I start to bring in language and these steps, and we start to give ourselves some space and permission and build trust, even in individuals. As we move through those different phases, it's really incredible to see what can happen.
I just want to say I really appreciate like the organic approach. I know how important language is in this advisory position, and I just know how important language is, period, for how we communicate. And I think you've done a really good job of like finding an organic process. And I love that your ethos is not to fix a problem, because it's not if once you try to fix something, that means it's a problem. So what you're doing is identifying that like all systems could use some improvements or some tweaks. And we can bring the human back into the workplace and approach systems change through, I guess, supporting people and like helping them to be at their best self. And when people are at their best selves and they're not burnt out, for example, then they're going to going to be more productive. Like if you look at you, and this will just be my last point and we can wrap up. You clearly have a strong work ethic, and that was never your challenge. But how do you work very hard now, even in a completely different position, but you're more energized by the work that you're doing. You're more motivated by it. You may work the same hours that you did before, but something about the way that you were working wasn't working for you. And now you're able to find more life in the work that you're doing because it gives you life. And I just think that whole organic approach and the words that you use are really important and really, I think, wise how you've approached this. So I value the work that you do, and I like the direction that you're going with it.
Well, thank you. And I'll just say that I have been very intentional. And I know I have to go first. Right? If I can't work through that process, right, the regenerative edge method in my own life, how can I guide someone through it? And that's been, I think, the most fun part of being an entrepreneur, giving myself permission to practice, and just be a few steps ahead, right? And that's, I think, a big part of this is learning how to learn from your own life, learning how to learn from like kind of nature and things that have helped humans survive for ages. But there's so much wisdom around us and within us. And often in our busy, very full lives, and the way we've kind of organized our current culture and the way we've been conditioned to show up for work and others and what it means to be successful, I knew I wanted to shift that. And that's been a deeply personal journey. And it's incredible to bring it professionally, because I can't tell you, I'm 42. I can't tell you how many peers who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s who are feeling this as well. I know there's a better way. And that organic approach, the way you phrase that is, I love it, because there's no one way to do this. And that's why I leave it open. It's more of a process than an exact framework. I don't do step-by-step things, because what worked for me won't necessarily work for everyone. And the way I work and where my skill sets and gifts are, there I can see what works, right? And we can play around, and I build that kind of trust and that safety, essentially, to practice and try new things and build a way that works for the client. And I think that's the fun part, where we have to take into consideration the wisdom, the experience, the gifts and skills of the team and the organization and the individuals who are there. Otherwise, it won't be regenerative. Otherwise, we won't be learning from our own lives and experiences. We'll be trying to mirror and mimic someone else's. And that's how we kind of got to this place. And that's a big part of the work that I want to avoid. Is being looking outside of ourselves for the answers.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to get lost in like the corporate identity of the business that you're working for or working with. So this gives you permission to like show up as your authentic self and yeah, I think just like find the best way to work, where you can like still, I bring it back to, and you haven't used this word, but really what I hear is like find the joy in the work that you're doing, because it's still there. You know, you got here somehow.
Yes. And that's so important. If we don't bring or look for joy in our work, or look for joyful cultures and groups to be part of, oof, what else is there? But
Yeah.
we often have to be reminded that that is something we can do. We have to be given permission to do that. And I think that's part of what I do see my work as being more of a movement as well. And there are so many amazing people doing similar work, but we can increase, there's space for all of us. We can increase the surface area, for more and more people to, learn from their own lives and to bring this not only into their own lives, but to their teams. And it really only takes one person to start the ripple effect of change.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Well, I love what you're doing. How can people find you or contact you? Like, what's the best way for people? Or if somebody is seeing this that thinks their business could benefit and maybe they're not
Mm.
in a decision-making seat, like what would you recommend?
Yeah. So they can find me on Substack, The Regenerative Edge, and I do have a page on my Substack, page. Not just, you can see my essays, you can see my notes, but you can also see ways to explore the work, ways to really be engaged in the work. And it can be one-on-one work with individual leaders, like I said. With teams, you'll see a link there. You can send me an email. I do have I do free workshops from time to time. You can always see links there. And like I said, I'm about to launch the Regenerative Lab, which will be a fun way to just a very low cost way to start to practice some things. And I'm also opening up the regenerative practice, which is a much more, I guess, involved way of working with me and other women, essentially, who are navigating transition in their leadership, whether it's um, a role change, a promotion. They just know they need something completely different, or it might even be a life change, because we all know that that happens, and we often need some community to help us get through that. And what does it mean to continue to lead through transition? So there's lots of ways. I'd say the best way is to come on over to Substack, and you can explore that. So thanks for asking that question, Mindy.
My computer just went out. Can you see me?
I got you.
Okay, good. Sorry, my screen went completely black there for a second.
Okay.
Okay, so you have different, yeah, you have different like product lines or service lines that you can
Exactly.
offer depending on where the person is at, where the organization is at, really.
Exactly. Yeah. See, this is why I knew just having a conversation with you is going to be so fun, because you're an amazing listener. You see all the different moving parts, and thank you for synthesizing, what I'm sharing, but also just helping me explore that a little bit more. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. I love having these conversations with you. And I can attest to, um, the work that you have done for me as a coach. And I know you have some, again, different applications in the work as a coach, as an advisor. I mean, I see you very much as a mentor and a friend and a colleague, but I have
Mm.
gained so much from getting to work with you, and having you support me. So thank you. And I
You're
always
so
support the
welcome.
work that you do.
Well, honestly, it goes both ways. I've learned so much from being with you. So, well, thank you. And I know this conversation will continue on in other settings.
Absolutely. Thank
All
you,
right.
Megan.
Bye.